Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Miami. Big thank you to Alex and Corporate Jet Investor for putting on what I think is probably one of the best shows that our industry has seen. Brings together some of the best minds, some of the best people, and in my opinion, gives everyone an opportunity to really get together and learn about each other, and brings the walls of competition down. So how about a big round of applause for Alex and Corporate Jet, please. Thank you. Thank you. So bear with me, this is my first time introducing myself and the company in front of an audience. So if I seem like I'm doing a good job, it's probably because of the 3 vodka sodas I had prior to sitting here. But no, all kidding aside, I do appreciate having the opportunity to be on stage and to talk to everybody and to talk a little bit about the industry of charter and where it was, where we are today, and where are we going, and really the technology around charter. So that was, if I could hit my slide here, and I think I'm getting a lot of feedback. If you guys can maybe turn it down just a little bit, appreciate it. So I think I have to hit this one here. Yeah. So using technology to make charter more efficient was what I was asked to talk about today, and I want to talk a little bit about what technology was back in the day. And the reason why I want to go back that way is because I think it's important to know what we thought technology was. And so where were we with technology, as I mentioned? Where are we today? And then, of course, where do we see ourselves in the next 10 years? Kind of the direction I like to go. So charter brokers for dummies. Now, why am I starting with charter brokers? Well, because I started as a charter broker. I started as a pilot. I have the bug for aviation, as most of you guys in here probably do, and probably the only reason why we make a business out of this. But to be a charter broker, you needed one of these, right? That was 2002 that device came out. BlackBerry actually came out a little sooner in the 90s, but that was probably the first, if we were talking technology in the charter business, everybody had a BlackBerry, and very important. And to pay homage to the next item here, the Air Charter Guide. We called this technology back in the day. And, although it was, we called it the Bible, right? Where operators would have all of their aircraft listed by region, and we'd go and we'd find our aircraft, and we would book from point A to B, B to C. And with those two, you got Money Mayweather, right? That's it. That's what it took. It took a little bit of emails ingenuity, finding some customers, finding the aircraft in the Air Charter Guide, and from that, you've got loads of cash being a charter broker. Really, it's all it took. There is no oversight. Anybody can be a broker, if you will. So it really started kind of a revolution. I was one of the first hires in the United States, first American employee for a company called Air Charter Service. And Air Charter Service, in my opinion, is probably one of the smartest charter brokers in the world. They've done very well by growing globally, and we didn't see eye to eye, so I made some moves and I left a year or so later. So charter management for dummies. Where were we in the past with charter managing, and what was it? So if everybody remembers that television show, if you remember and you know this show, you're truly an aviation geek. Wings was a CBS special in the 90s that really identified a wonderful charter operation flying out of Nantucket. They had their director of maintenance, and they had their pilots and their dispatch, and it was a fun series. If you haven't watched it, I think Netflix is actually putting it back up for some reruns. And then the phone, the dreaded phone, right? And the skeletons there, because the way it used to work back in the day was, we would wait for our brokers, and I also have a 135 business, so I'm going to be talking from experience from a broker standpoint, and talking from experience as an operator. We would wait for the phone back in the day, and because we were so busy in trying to focus on our aircraft, our owners, the maintenance of the aircraft, compliance with the FAA. We really didn't focus too much on our retail sales. And we'll talk about what it is today, but I wonder if a lot's changed. I do think you've seen a lot of operators go more towards retail, but I think if you did a survey, you'd find that most operators are still reliant on secondary sellers like brokers. So what were the inefficiencies for brokers? And when I say brokers, also think of buyers. What were the inefficiencies? Time focused on sourcing rather than selling, right? We would literally make 3,000 phone calls just to get one customer. And then, of course, we would make 4,000 phone calls just to find an airplane for that customer to fly from New York to Florida, Florida to New York, and sometimes even 2 aircraft. There was no such thing as empty legs or one-ways back in the day. Abundance of unoccupied aircraft. So let's talk about that. It's pretty amazing because when I started in 2004 as a broker, it was funny because we'd have all these deadheads and empty legs. And of course, we'd jump on the empty leg and we'd fly down to Miami or to the Bahamas to pick up the customer. You realize it got a little expensive because you still had to pay for the hotels. But we had so many empty legs, and there was absolutely no way to broadcast or market the one way as the empty legs. There was no such thing as floating fleets. The revolution of the time was fractional, and NetJets being the first to put aircraft in different locations and not worrying about an owner. They were still 1.5 times the cost, though. So typically what would happen if we go back to the model, the way it used to work, a broker, let's say if the flight was originating out of New York, a broker would go through the Bible, the air charter guide, and they would find an operator that had a mid-jet, if that met their criteria for their 3 or 4 passengers, and they would book that flight, or they would call up the operator and they say, is your aircraft available to fly from New York to Florida on the 12th? And they would say yes. Is it available to fly back on the 16th? Absolutely, it's available. They send the quote, and they're now showing a price. If it's a $4,000 an hour airplane, typically the hourly rate hasn't changed in the last 10 or 15 years for, call it a Hawker 800. $4,000 times 3 hours is 12 grand there, and 12 grand back. They'd pay $24,000 just to get down because the plane wasn't going to sit there. The owner had requirements, and the plane would go. So a few days later, they would book that same aircraft. It'd be another $24,000. So you've just paid $24,000 times 2. Pretty amazing. And with all of those deadheads and those empty legs, these aircraft were flying, and it was very inefficient. And again, almost twice the cost to the consumer. So obviously very inefficient for the consumer. And obviously, if we talk about, a carbon footprint, and if we really want to look at what we've done over the years, I would certainly say that, and if we're going to thank brokers, we can thank brokers for cutting the carbon footprint, because we try to sell the heck out of every empty leg we possibly can, right? So we're actually utilizing those legs. There are also additional technologies that we'll talk about that have come out to help optimize most of the large fleets here. So major inefficiencies for operators, no floating fleet concept. So, and I do think there are a number of 135 operators out there today that still have, and a lot of owners will call them up and they'll say, well, where's my airplane going to be based? And say, well, but we want 500 hours we're going to use the aircraft 100 hours, and we really want you to charter that airplane 300 to 400 hours because, that's what my friend's airplane charter, and that just about covers the cost, and et cetera, et cetera. So if an airplane is flying that much, well, it has no base. The base is either flying with you, owner, or it's on charter. It's somewhere away. So still to this day, I think a lot of operators have the difficulty in understanding that an aircraft doesn't have a base. And I think you'll realize that when you're paying, if you're in Teterboro, $20,000 a month for a hangar, and you realize that the aircraft is probably in that hangar 2 days a month. Does it make sense to pay for that hangar? No. Not one aircraft in my entire fleet, and we don't have many, we have 7 aircraft, have a hangar cost anymore. That's fixed rent. So big inefficiency there. No control of booked hours. So what does this mean? And again, remember, I'm talking about 10 years ago. Does this translate to what's happening today? And if it does for some of you guys that are operators out there, what does it mean by no control of booked hours? In my book, it basically means that Again, going back to that concept with that skeleton sitting on the phone, you have a group of schedulers sitting, waiting for the call. There are no tools for them out there. We believed, the commodity was the actual aircraft itself, which means that we're waiting for someone to pick up the phone. Perfect example, wonderful operator in Islip MacArthur Airport gets a phone. I'll name them XLR. I think they're excellent if anyone hears from XLR. We'll pick up the phone on a Thursday, and broker says, is your aircraft available to fly Thursday, your G4, Thursday from Teterboro to Miami. I've got 7 passengers. They require a heavy jet, and available to fly back on Sunday. And they say yes over the telephone, right? And they shoot back a quote via email on our nifty new handheld BlackBerry device. And we like it, the broker likes it, we book it. Confirmed flight, 6 hours on the board, it's on the schedule, we write it up. Less than an hour later, broker B calls up and says, hey, is your G4 available to fly from Teterboro to London, Stansted, on Friday, return to Sunday? And that broker and that operator, well, that operator says to that broker, I'm sorry, we already have a confirmed trip on the board. Having a confirmed trip on the board for 6 hours, that operator just gave up a 12-hour trip or 14-hour trip. So think about the loss of control of booked hours, understanding that each aircraft is mission specific. If I'm in a 135 department and I'm trying to book my aircraft, my King Air should be doing my 500 nautical mile trips. My Gulfstream should be flying across the pond. We know now, we know today, and we knew then, but aircraft are more efficient for their specific mission, right? A Gulfstream burns less fuel at altitude. A landing, is less rotation wear and tear on the tires, less wear and tear on the APU. This makes the best sense, but again, no control. So if you're an operator and you sit there and you say to yourself, well, do I have control of the hours that I put on my aircraft? And you don't, then you're living in the past. And wholesale over retail. So what does this mean? Again, you're not dealing directly with the end user. You're dealing with the broker. Operators already work on very, very small margins, and I see how we talk together about these amazing technologies that are coming out, and I think that some will help. But until we actually increase our model, our revenue models, I think it's going to be very difficult because most of us have, in the 135 world, the operator world, a necessity for cash flow. So, who's paying for these aircraft before they're actually chartering? But you want to make sure that you can capture the additional 15% that brokers earn. If you're not, and if you're an operator out there now that has whatever 30, 40 airplanes, and you're reliant on brokers, maybe you should figure out, how to capture additional revenue. So the first organization of charter in the United States, this is pretty cool. I have to pay homage to the National Business Aviation Association and its famous airmail. Airmail was a very antiquated, still is, email exchange between thousands of operators and brokers. When it first started, it was cool. We had 2 or 3 emails. And if everybody remembers Pacific Jet, they were the first ones posting on it. Jet Direct took a bit of it. But we spoke to each other. We finally had, hey, is anybody going south today? Is anyone have an S-N, south-north? White Plains to MIA, to Tamiami. It's the first time we had the opportunity to share through an email exchange where our aircraft were. And this was the first organization of empty legs and one-ways in the United States. In 2002, 2009, we have CharterX and Avinode. And 2, I think, wonderful companies. CharterX originally started in the United States, Avinode overseas, and now we really start getting a little bit more complex, where we're breaking down aircraft type available. Avinode, and I don't think CharterX had it, but in parallel correct me, but Avinode was one of the first companies that started integrating through APIs into scheduling software, which allowed aircraft to show availability in its true form. So in other words, if my aircraft is sitting in Teterboro, it's available, and it really is at least have availability. It's sitting there. Does it have owner approval yet? Maybe not, but it's one of the first ways to organize. In 2010, any really smart company, which Avinode was, bought their competition. And Avinode, I think, had a terrific run. And what the most important thing about Avinode, what they did, is that they were the first company to connect this industry in a global way, where they had operators and they had aircraft availability, not only in Europe, but with and through the CharterX platform, we're able to bring U.S. aircraft on. This is a tremendous tool. We utilize the tool, but it definitely caused some friction in the industry because, you know, different regions, different ways of doing business. In 2013, amongst a few other companies that have come and some have stayed, CharterPad was born. And there were a few unruly charter brokers. I and my late partner, Adam, decided to create a platform very similar to LinkedIn, the first open source platform. And we're talking a lot about open source platforms. The first open source platform where any operator, without having to pay, can list their aircraft. So the buyer knows that I can find the most aircraft available. The other thing that CharterPad did was it tried to educate the industry, the operators, that the aircraft is not the commodity, but the trip is the commodity. Again, going back to that story where we're looking at the London trip versus the New York-Miami trip, you know, why isn't there a board where there are trips that are out there for bid, like an eBay? The trip is what we want, not the aircraft. There's aircraft. And we do know, and the study has shown, that 5 or less aircraft belong to 75% of the charter industry. So yes, we've got some large behemoths, VistaJet and Delta Private Jets and JetLinks, 3 of which I think very, very great companies that I still today book their aircraft. And by the way, I want to say this too, as the founder of CharterPad, I also, and my entire charter brokerage, utilizes Avinode. Why? Because you don't build a house with one tool. You don't. So it's another tool for the industry that allowed the industry to grow. And our concept, my late partner Adam and I's concept, was to have an open source platform. But it was, and we found it very difficult to change the minds of operators, having their in-house team start to look for flights, rather than just wait for the phone to ring. But it's worked. And I'll tell you one thing, a small company, Cinco Airways, which allowed me to continue to invest in the company and bring it to where it was, they said to me that this is fantastic because it's allowed us to be independent and look for the hours that made sense in our fleet. So last year, 2018, Click acquired CharterPad, and Click Aviation Network, as some may know, is an international permit and handling platform. And we believed that, now I say we because I am now manager of Click, we believed that it was the absolute best resource for CharterPad to expand globally. It needed global reach, and Click was the best company to do that. So where are we now? What are we doing now? And certainly it's left a lot of void in the industry. And if your logo is not up there, I'm sorry. There's only so much room on the slide. There are probably about 30 companies right now that are competing for the space to be the next behemoth tech company to manage. And I give homage to Voli. Thank you for learning a new Italian word. I think it's pretty cool. I think the concept is awesome. And I certainly believe that we're talking about what's next in the industry are open source platforms. There's no question that the system needs to be like Google, where you can search something for free, where it's there. It's a tool for you to utilize, for your company to grow with. Real-time and instantaneous results. We can do payments. We can have a quick result. And you can have the transfer of money, but you don't have permits into Nice. So there's no trip. So it has to be a complete package, right? We can figure out transactional solutions, which I think we're getting there. We see, a lot of use of the word blockchain and being able to utilize that technology, and how we, we'll move forward with secure payment platforms, certainly is going to happen. Universal connectivity, what does this mean? To me, this means having direct access to the end user. You, operator, have direct access to the FBO in New Guinea, in Baku, right? Having that direct access, maybe there's a liaison in the middle to assist with, the payment process, but, again, having that open source platform is a true open source platform. And smart technology, we talk about artificial intelligence assisting our daily activities. We have seen some tremendous companies on the 135 side, FuelerLinks. We don't talk about FuelerLinks, but I think it's a tremendous company that has not only helped with sourcing fuel and keeping costs down for operators, but it's also helped the environment. So what's next? Is it Click Aviation? Is it one of our other competitors out there? I think what's next is a system and a platform where we work together, where there are no boundaries, where we communicate. The most difficult thing for everyone in this room, and we can talk about it here today, is information, is data. How do we share that data? And what happens with that data? A lot of you don't realize that all this data is already shared. It's already there. If a broker A is booking a charter with operator B, the passenger information is there. Then that operator puts it through to a Universal, to a Click Aviation, to a UAS, and all of the passenger details are there. The catering information, it's all there. If a client flies on JetEdge's aircraft into Nice, and there was a note somewhere in a system that said he really loved the cheesecake from XYZ restaurant, why isn't that being taken over to really give what we're all talking about here, a client-centric customer experience? Because that's what's going to separate any company. I personally don't believe that technology is going to replace the human. We are in such a niche market where, can you imagine walking into a five-star restaurant where you're willing to pay $1,000 for dinner and a machine is cooking your dinner, or the server comes out in a robot? It won't work. It won't work. The relationship in this business, in my opinion, is the key to what makes us successful. And I think the technology behind it is what's going to create the opportunities and the network for everyone within it. That's my spiel. Any questions? Please let me know. So,
any questions or comments? Okay, we have one on Slido, and I think you'll all agree it was written by a lawyer.
Yeah. How do you comply with the DOT Air Charter Broker Rule of 14 CFR Part 295, which requires transparency? Well, it's simple, right? Every agreement, and we should learn from other companies, like the yacht charter industry, every single agreement that you put out to a customer should show who operates that aircraft, right? And I believe that's what that regulation is talking about. Transparency through who operates that aircraft, the same way you walk onto one of Kenny's airplanes and says it's operated by Gamma Aviation, right? I mean, we're not afraid to say who operates those airplanes. We've been in business as a charter broker for nearly 15 years, and every single one of our customers come back to us because we offer value. There's, in my opinion, never been a problem. And in fact, before this rule came out, many brokers were letting the operators or letting their customers know who their operators were.
Okay. Any more questions or comments? That was brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.